final seconds, getting it off. Yes.
The first movie, Star Trek, the motion picture.
You are witnessing a new technology. The first and only game powered by the Super FX microchip. Why go to the next level when you can go light years beyond? You are Fox McCloud in Star Fox, only for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System.
Star Fox, the franchise rich in history but poor in output and relevancy thanks to Nintendo's lack of awareness. Story told again and again. I mean, what is there not to love about this furry, democracy-spreading, space-adventuring pilot? This historic Nintendo icon rose in rank quickly from its debut on the SNES in 1993 and also with its more beloved follow-up on the N64 in 97. Two entries worthy of cementing the titular character's place in the series in which most people today would become familiar with the guy in the original Smash, the series that would end up featuring him once more before him receiving an entry in his own respective series. To say Fox has been given the short end of the stick would be a bit insensitive, considering plenty of other Nintendo series haven't seen the light of day in decades. I'm looking at you, mother. I'm sorry. But nonetheless, Star Fox, at least on a presentation level, appears to be a franchise among Nintendo's lineage that should stand up amidst the greats, including Mario and Zelda, and hell, even Metroid, who's seen an uptick in popularity due to the current renaissance era of Metroidvanias. Yet the last entry of Fox was in 2016 and was met with very questionable reception, to say the least. Yes, I'm ignoring Star Fox 2. That was a pack-in, I don't really care. Now, I didn't play the original Star Fox or sequel at the time of the release. In fact, I wasn't even alive. But as someone that has since played them, I ask, what did Star Fox Zero do that was so critically different from its first steps? I know I wasn't there at the time of the originals, and I know Zero had its problems, but to say Zero didn't do enough to innovate yet capture the spirit of the original simultaneously would be superficial. Now, Zero certainly had its problems. The controls, the levels, whatever. I'm not really here to try to defend Zero. It's not great. I know. But I believe the root of its problem is simply the Star Fox formula, which seems to be the problem with Nintendo and its many lost franchises. Formulas that after inception were fresh and innovative, but now seem one-noted. I have a guttural response when I dare to even say that they might even be outdated. The on-rails shooter that defined the 90s saw success from its innovation, including its intergalactic cast and their eventual voice, to its stunning 3D visuals. Elements that at the time seemed, well, were innovative and stood out amongst the rest, but now in today's games seem like the status quo. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, gaming has changed. Games are bigger, more complicated, and more expensive than ever. So for a Nintendo franchise like Star Fox rooted in, let's be honest, simple design, how do you iterate and innovate a new entry many years later that captures the magic that originally turned the name into a franchise? Could you make a modern $60 or $80 Star Fox game that not only respects the fans of the furry guy, but also excites newcomers in a package that is not just worthy of the price tag, but also just fun? Because again, let's be honest, how many times can you iterate this particular gameplay before you run out of new ideas and it's just not fun? Or also in this case, how many times can you do a barrel roll before you bail? It's a very blurred line to tackle, a very hard stick to yoke, am I right? I'm sorry. It's a problem that many developers have struggled with for years. You either rinse what came before, drawing in people familiar with the formula, but at the risk of being redundant or stale, or you literally iterate off the original formula, creating something fresh and different to the point where the original product has now evolved into a completely different entity. It's quite the predicament. A predicament that Nintendo actually attempted to tackle all the way back late in the N64's lifespan with one of the most interesting comings of a Nintendo game. A game that would eventually star the eluding character, Star Fox Adventures. Released in 2002, this game would be only the third main entry in the series. Taking heavy inspirations from the then groundbreaking structure of the recent 3D Legend of Zelda games, Star Fox would trade in his traditional space adventuring, level-based routes for a more boots-on-the-ground experience, relying on open-world exploration and hand-to-hand combat. While I actually like this change and rather really enjoy this game, this shift in design would prove to be quite controversial to fans the further we get from the original release. Or so I thought. Upon release, Star Fox Adventures would shockingly be met with pretty damn good critical reception, with many praising its Ocarina influence. While doing research for this game, I was pleasantly surprised by just how well received this game was at its time of release. For me, I loved this game growing up, but I always thought that this game was the black sheep of the Star Fox catalog, for more than one reason. However, it does feel like the game still falls into the shadows of its predecessors. Star Fox Adventures seem to fade into obscurity, rarely discussed, and almost as if it were a forgotten relic. Was it because Fox McCloud's foray into adventure gaming was and still is overshadowed by his spacefaring roots? Or perhaps it was because the initial praise declined as nostalgia for the original Star Fox games grew and solidified their place in fans' hearts. The story behind Star Fox Adventures is as intriguing as the game itself, a project that almost didn't exist, born from the ashes of an original vision, molded by corporate influence and pushed to new heights by ambition. It's a tale of transformation and compromise, and a reminder of the challenges developers face when balancing creativity and expectation. And to explain how this hodgepodge of a game came together, we first have to go back to 1994. This is the most interesting Nintendo game of all time. The mid-80s to early 90s saw a great number of prominent game developers rising to fame, some because of an impressive lineup of game releases, others due to their expertise and innovation in tech, and a select few for both reasons. British developer Rare was one of these companies. From delivering titles such as RC Pro-Am in 1987 and Battletoads in 1991 to its early experiments with 3D models and graphics, Rare firmly established itself as a formidable developer, desperate to push the boundaries of the gaming industry. With several critically acclaimed titles and an already established relationship with Nintendo, Rare was perfectly poised for its next big leap. Nintendo seized the opportunity to solidify their partnership with Rare, and in 1994, they decided to put a ring on it. Nintendo purchased 25% of Rare, a stake that would eventually rise to 49%, creating a strong relationship between the two companies while still allowing Rare to maintain majority control over its decisions. A mere 2% difference from an alternate universe that would eventually come back to haunt Nintendo. But that's a story for another day. However, it would be a decision that nonetheless would prove to be fruitful for Nintendo. With Rare and Nintendo now stronger than ever, the dominoes began to fall. Rare expanded its operations and split the studio into smaller teams, allowing for a steady flow of games to be produced in shorter time frames. This golden era of Rare and Nintendo's partnership graced the gaming industry with some of the greatest titles ever released, including the revolutionary multiplayer first-person shooter GoldenEye, the underappreciated Jet Force Gemini, and the critically acclaimed Perfect Dark. Rare also delivered on the platforming front, creating the iconic Banjo-Kazooie duo and taking Donkey Kong to new heights with the much-beloved Donkey Kong Country series, Donkey Kong 64, and the arguably superior N64 kart racer, Diddy Kong Racing. I have spoken. By the late 90s, Rare had cemented its legacy as one of the best in the industry. With recognition of others and their now deep understanding of the power of the N64, it was time to push the limit of the hardware even further and start development on their biggest and most ambitious project to date. Using scrapped ideas from their past entries and combining them with new, bold, and exciting visions such as fully detailed characters, a day and night cycle, weather, and even cinematic cutscenes with full voice acting. And after a completely smooth development cycle, Star Fox Adventures would release on the N64 and set the world on fire, proving yet again the ease that goes into making video games. Well, not really. Let's back it up real quick. Rare began production of the next challenge of theirs under a different name, Dinosaur Planet. The concept for Dinosaur Planet emerged after the release of Diddy Kong Racing in 1997. Initially, the game was to feature Timber, a tiger character from Diddy Kong Racing, as a time-traveling protagonist in a prehistoric world. However, as development progressed, Timber was replaced by two new characters, Saber, a wolf, and Crystal, a fox. The gameplay was designed to be an open-world adventure with two interwoven storylines, allowing players to switch between Saber and Crystal using a feature called the Swap Stone. Keep that in mind, that'll come back later. The narrative centered on Saber and Crystal, who were paired with sidekicks Tricky and Kite, respectively. Saber was depicted as the son of a wizard named Randorn, while Crystal was Randorn's adoptive daughter. That's about it. You see, there isn't much concrete evidence or documentation about this phase of development. The history of the early build of Dinosaur Planet is shrouded in mystery, with only scattered fragments of footage and occasional programmer interviews offering glimpses into its past. However, rumors tell of a man in Sweden who somehow obtained a copy of this elusive early build. That copy, as the story goes, has since made its way to the public. While the specifics of how and where to find it are, shall we say, a bit murky, fans, including myself, allegedly, have explored this build and have uncovered fascinating insights into Rare's original vision for the game. This early version showcased dynamic characters with fully voiced dialogue, richly detailed environments, and gameplay mechanics that hinted at something truly ambitious. Notably, it included this intriguing dual protagonist system, as I mentioned before, complete with their respective sidekicks, offering a unique take on traditional adventure gameplay. From this demo, it was clear that Dinosaur Planet was well into development, with a clear creative direction and all the ingredients needed to transform a promising slice into a full-fledged experience. Now fast forward to 2000, when Dinosaur Planet made its grand debut at E3. While much of the coverage of this showcase has faded into obscurity, I managed to dig up a rare artifact, a single page from the July 2000 issue of Game Informer, published just a month after the E3 demo. The article highlights the game's standout features, including its expressive characters, detailed facial animations, and impressive voice acting, elements that helped set Dinosaur Planet apart at the time. They go on to talk a little bit about the companion and combat system, citing that it's similar to Zelda. They even call the game a 512 megabit monster, which is just hilarious to think about today. And they top it off by saying, "Even the little we played of Dinosaur Planet was amazing. It's almost scary to think what the whole adventure will be like. If only they knew." Yeah, it seems like record of this E3 demo is either lost or non-existent. However, it did grab the attention of one man, a man that, as rumor goes, would be responsible for turning the tides, ultimately altering the game into the version as we know today. And that man was none other than Shigeru Miyamoto. And after a sequence of events, an alleged conversation between Miyamoto and a Rare executive transpired in a way that I can only imagine went. That character right there. What's his name? Saber? The main character? Yeah. He kind of looks like Fox McCloud. Yeah, I guess I can see it. You should turn this into a Star Fox game. Okay. From that point on, Dinosaur Planet was dead. The next entry in the Star Fox franchise was in motion. While many aspects of the original vision would find its way into the final product, as you'll come to learn, much of the new elements needed to retrofit this new ambition would force the team at Rare to head back to the drawing boards once again, which of course would inevitably require more time at development. As a consequence, the intended timeline for the game's release was pushed further, so far in fact that the idea of even releasing a title on the then N64's aging hardware started to feel less like an opportunity to capitalize on the knowledge and expertise of the hardware. And with the next generation just around the corner, production of the new Star Fox entry would pivot from being an N64 game to a GameCube game instead, delaying production even more. After 2 additional years of development, years that weren't exactly well documented, Star Fox Adventures finally landed on store shelves on September 23, 2002, and to much surprise, the game was received relatively well. Even after a dramatic mid-production pivot, the game came together creating a big and never-before-had adventure for the Star Fox team, with several notable aspects such as its big and playful world with stunning graphics that were way ahead of its time and completely hold up today. Certainly not all aspects would help the game be remembered as kindly, specifically an underdeveloped companion system and writing that, let's just say, an aspect that has been carefully and passionately paid more attention to in modern games.
General Scales, Hiku, Kohud, or Taskuki, Eve Dinosaur Planet.
Rare's ability to not only uptake a sudden and pivotal change of the game's identity and the following attributes associated with said new identity, but also transition to new hardware entirely, is an impressive feat. Looking back on it now, it's really interesting to learn how something so special, at least to me, all came together. But honestly, I'm not satisfied. I need more. I need to know more. I mean, we're talking about a British game studio taking on the role of not only borrowing a popular Nintendo character, but using them in a way that is so fundamentally different from what they were known for. Surely that has to come with a lot of pressure and overlook. I mean, just imagine. One day you're working on a game, and the next day you're working on a game for Nintendo. I need to know how something like that happens, why it happens, and what that is like. And if there's one person that could possibly help me understand this all, well, perhaps it would be the director himself.
Hello, Michael. My name is Lee Schuneman. I've been in the gaming and tech industry for almost 30 years. I joined Rare in 1996, and spent a long time making all sorts of interesting games, working with great people, and building new technology. I was the game director of Star Fox Adventures.
That's right. This is Lee. He was the game director during the production of both Dinosaur Planet and Star Fox Adventures. Lee had been working at Rare for some time, contributing to titles such as Donkey Kong Land 2 and Mickey's Racing Adventure before stepping into that role as game director for none other than Diddy Kong Racing. November 21st, 1997, when Diddy Kong Racing was released on the N64, at least here in America, right, in which you are credited as the game director.
Correct.
And matter of fact, you actually contributed to that game in a couple of ways. You were not only the game director, but you also voiced a character.
That's right. Yeah, I was Bumper the Badger. I was also the voice of General Scales, of course.
General Scales.
We didn't hire any voice actors at that time, so we all had just fun playing with the characters.
Well, all things considering, I think you did greatly. It's important to point out that while Star Fox Adventures was released in 2002, it's still very much a 90s game. This was a different era in game development, even for major studios. Today, it's almost expected for a AAA game to have a cinematic story, blockbuster level voice acting, and all the bells and whistles. But back then, those things weren't always front and center. Maybe it was due to limited resources. Maybe the audience just didn't demand it yet. Either way, that often meant smaller teams had to stretch beyond the usual roles. Developers would step in wherever they were needed, contributing in ways that went beyond their job title, especially when the vision called for something bigger, bolder, and more ambitious than just hopping around in a world and stomping on the heads of enemies. But more on that later. Right now, knowing Lee's involvement in both Diddy Kong Racing and Dinosaur Planet, I wanted to close that gap between the two, and really dig into when and how the initial idea for Dinosaur Planet first started to take shape. There was kind of like the area where I would assume the early production of the phase started, at least for Dinosaur Planet, because what I see is that production, I'm assuming full production of Dinosaur Planet started around 1999, but you guys had a demo for E3 come out in 2000, so I imagine that there was, and that's a pretty quick turnaround for a production that only started in 99.
Yeah, so let me try to get it right. I'm sure others will correct it, but on the back of Diddy Kong Racing, I have a clear memory of sitting in Japan with Tim and Chris Stamper and Joel Hochberg. And I don't know if you all know the Joel and the Stamper brothers were the three Rare bosses, for want of a better word. And DKR was looking like it was going to be successful. I'd been playing a pre-release of Zelda, and Nintendo were very kind to give us some early ROMs to look or play around with before it came out. So I'd been playing around with that, and was like, hey, let me make a Zelda style adventure game. That was literally how it started. We pulled the team together to start working on Dinosaur Planet. We were always our creativity came from building new IP, right? If you look at the Diddy Kong history, it wasn't Diddy Kong Racing. It was called, first it was actually Timber's Racing Adventure. Then it became RC Pro-Am 64.
Yes.
And then, we were like, hey, Banjo-Kazooie is late. We want to put this game out as the big Christmas release. Why don't we put Diddy Kong in it? We were like, okay, fine. Turns out, they knew way better than we did. And Star Fox obviously goes through a similar journey.
Man, that Ocarina influence is undeniable. And honestly, it's refreshing to hear a developer just come out and straight up say, yeah, we wanted to make a Zelda. But the real takeaway here is what I learned about the business side behind the transformation of Dinosaur Planet. It wasn't just Nintendo putting their foot down or a purely creative choice. The key factor behind the shift was something much simpler, rooted in business strategy. Even simpler, it was the question of, does this sell? A question in which Rare was familiar with, as Diddy Kong Racing also went through a similar predicament, as Lee further explains. But first, we need to get the team together. The production starts in, you said, 98, around 98?
It would have been in early '98, and we started pulling the team together, and there's a couple of key players in that team that came from Diddy Kong as well. You had Phil Tossell, who was the lead software guy, Paul Mountain. We had people like Kevin Bayliss. Kev is the original creator of the Super Nintendo Donkey Kong character and a whole range of amazing characters that Kevin created with us. Another great artist called Johnny Christensen. Johnny was this fantastic. Let me get this right. Where is he from? He's Copenhagen. So Danish 3D artist that built some of those early Fox renders. So really good team, and a lot of fantastic concept art by Nick. And we started pulling together this game. We were very excited about it. We showed it off to all the Nintendo leadership, like Arakawa-san, and Miyamoto saw it. And we showed up at E3. Everyone was excited. Here's a new game from Rare. And then GameCube starts to become a thing, right? And around that time as well, we were beginning to Rare was beginning to explore. Does it sell? Does it go and sell itself to somebody else? Because at that time, we were a private business. Nintendo had a big stake in us as a company. But then, Tim and Chris started to explore some opportunity for them. And, we got very close to being bought by Activision at that time. And Microsoft was on the obviously is where we ended up. But that was happening. GameCube is coming. We weren't ready to release the game. So, and it was on N64, right? We were trying to be too ambitious and create something awesome. And, and it was really good. But those three things are colliding now, and we got to make a change.
With the team finally in place, development was moving along pretty well. They were experimenting, taking bold creative swings, and the energy was palpable. This was a team stacked with talent, all pushing hard towards something big. But beneath all that momentum was a layer of uncertainty. The next generation of consoles was closing in. Rumors of a studio acquisition were floating around, and the lingering question remained, could an original IP really succeed at the scale they were aiming for? Deep down, they knew something had to shift, and with E3 right around the corner, that change was coming. That shift, of course, would be led by none other than Shigeru Miyamoto himself, kicking off the now infamous, often whispered meeting that changed everything that I, of course, needed to know more of.
I'm not. Look, a meeting could have happened, and I've worked with and met Miyamoto on a few occasions. The first time I actually met Miyamoto was at an E3 in '96, it must have been, and when we showed him Diddy Kong Racing for the first time. Mm-hmm. And that was at E3 in Atlanta. So, know Miyamoto, work with him on a few projects, and we'll talk more about that in Star Fox. The only thing I recall from the move from Dinosaur Planet to Star Fox was actually a fax. You know what a fax is, right?
Of course.
Right. And with a note related to our character in the game, Saber, looked a lot like Fox McCloud. So why don't we think about repositioning this game to be a Star Fox kind of title? That's what I recall. Now, could have been a meeting, don't know, but at the end of the day, doesn't matter. We had to change, and like I said, it's definitely related to GameCube is coming. We have a great game, and Nintendo wants a launch title. So, are we in the best position to take Dinosaur Planet and have it be a launch title for the GameCube?
Was that like a consensual agreement, or did Nintendo kind of like just step in and kind of almost force your hand at this transition?
No, it never works. Nintendo's, I mean, at least the Nintendo I knew from then was never like that. And, this is very much a discussion that happens between them and Tim and Chris Stamper. And, you weigh this up. This seems very sensible decision, right? If we're going to come at the end of a generation versus being a launch title for a new generation, and why not? So, I don't think there's no drama on our side of it particularly, other than, okay, well, let's take a look at what we can do. Now, of course, it's a pain because we've been working on it for 2 years, and then you're like, oh, okay, now I've got to do this for another 2 years. But outside of that, it makes a lot of sense, actually. Same, like I said, back to Diddy Kong Racing. Would Diddy Kong Racing be what it was without Diddy Kong and that title? Probably not. It's hard to tell with Dinosaur Planet and Star Fox, but I think it's the right decision, actually.
So you guys were excited about that?
We're excited about working on new hardware, of course. Once you get you're having the first GameCube development system in the whole world, and you get to start playing around. You get to start creating, this big uplift in visuals and expand the game. Yes, it's a lot of fun. And of course, we all love Star Fox, right? Like
That's what I was trying to mean, like working with a Nintendo character and creating your own game using some iconic character from the Nintendo library seems like an incredible opportunity to
Totally.
Did Nintendo's involvement at that point kind of like impact your team's control over what you could or could not do, or what you could add or kind of leave out from any Star Fox element or Nintendo element? So you guys really you could really just do whatever you wanted with Star Fox?
Yeah.
Even with Big Dog Nintendo stepping in, this was very much Rare's game. It's honestly kind of wild to hear that a company so famously protective over its IPs would basically hand over the keys to the Star Fox universe to a Western studio. Then again, this wasn't the first time Nintendo trusted Rare with their prized franchises. But for a game of this scale, and one that was such a departure from Fox's roots, it's genuinely surprising how on board Nintendo seemed to be. Even more surprising, they actually sounded excited about it. And yet, despite their involvement, Rare's development process, very much rooted in that 90s style of game making, remained largely unchanged.
Dinosaur Planet and Star Fox were trying to be more story-based. So I was writing the script. Again, not saying it's very good, but that was on me. I have to write the script, write all the, get that cast together, get that story to work, and then we're working on a fighting system, or we're working on, how Fox is going to run around and jump, it's a lot of in small detail things, but your job as the director is to make sure that all of that detail works together then as a holistic whole.
That was for Dinosaur Planet though, right?
And Star Fox, same thing. We just evolved. The team grew a little bit, but not hugely. It's not a massive team that made that game. And the big uplift was we had some fantastic software engineers, Nick Burton and Cliff Ramshaw, who came and rethought. The graphics on Star Fox Adventures still look incredible now, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely.
Way ahead of its time, I think. Someone like Cliff as an example, Cliff went on to, he worked at Pixar and ILM and was one of those graphic geniuses. Amazing guy.
But even though Rare was still figuring things out, experimenting with roles and working to fill every gap in their ambitious vision, that didn't mean they were doing it all alone. They did get some help from Nintendo along the way.
Then we get summoned to Nintendo Japan. So that's like the next part of the story. We're like, all right, we're going to make this game together. How do we do it? So myself and Phil Tossell and Kevin Bayliss, we jump on the plane. We go to Kyoto, and we get 2 weeks working with Miyamoto and team, and have to then figure out, all right, well, how are we going to take this and take Star Fox, and how do those two things fit together, and how do we make this happen? So that was a fun trip. We're of course mindful of what Star Fox is and how we can bring some of those elements together. Like I said, we spent a lot of time in Japan and working with the team there in terms of the work with Miyamoto in particular was more about how to build a new structure. So that whole idea of the bits of the planet coming apart, we basically whiteboarded that in a room with Miyamoto. Like that came from that sort of session.
For some context on this new structure of the game that he's talking about, the planet being fragmented into floating islands in orbit marked as one of the most significant changes between the two versions. In Dinosaur Planet, the player would travel across the world in search of Krazoa spirits. Not only were there still Krazoa spirits part of the journey, but now there was also spell stones, powerful artifacts scattered across various regions that played a key role in the planet's stability. The villain, General Scales, had been removing these spell stones, causing the planet to break apart in floating islands. As a result, Fox is sent to visit each of these locations, essentially acting as levels or open zones to track down the missing spellstones and return them to their rightful places. This mission forms the backbone of the game's structure, with the ultimate goal of restoring the planet to its original unified state.
And he was more focused on that element and the kind of reorienting of the work.
While the game obviously went through a dramatic transformation, many elements of Dinosaur Planet still made their way into Star Fox Adventures, as I mentioned before. At its core, Dinosaur Planet is still very much alive in the final product, and while Nintendo did step in to help shape certain aspects so the game made sense for Fox and its universe, some of their most valuable contributions came on the technical side, helping Rare's already talented team push things even further.
And then after that, we had Imamura-san. Imamura-san was the artist that originally created Fox McCloud. And him and another Nintendo employee, Goda-san, came and spent a couple of months probably with us at Rare and helped us again continue to progress and give it that Star Fox feel. That was the main element that they did in terms of the adventure, all the different ways that the adventure flowed and worked. They didn't actually do that much. But what they really brought to the table, like I said, was the restructuring and setup of the world and how the game was going to be introduced. And then Imamura especially, we learned a lot from working with him in terms of how to make the playfulness of running around with a character feel great and making it feel like Fox. So
at this point, it might seem like we have a clear picture of how things were going to turn out, but there were still a few essential Star Fox elements that would end up setting the two projects apart in a big way. I think about the R-Wing segments, because obviously that wasn't going to be a thing in Dinosaur Planet. You guys didn't have any kind of like gameplay moments that interrupted Dinosaur Planet in the way that the R-Wings did, so that segment of the structure, like you were talking about, of how that would kind of came with the Nintendo, there was the R-Wing moments. And I also want to get to the couple images that you sent me with Slippy. Slippy being animated. You showed me a quick clip of Slippy being animated, and not just in the R-Wing, just him as a character model, which is interesting because he's not in the game as a character model, at least not in gameplay, So what was that all about?
Well, look, a lot of these things come down to when you're first starting to wrap your head around how you bring these characters into that adventure. And then you're looking and saying, well, okay, GameCube launch is coming on this date. There's like the aspiration of what you want to do, which is, hey, let's take all of these characters and build an adventure around them. That sounds like the right type of Star Fox adventure game to do, right? But we've already built a game called Dinosaur Planet. We already have a character called Fox McCloud and Crystal. And, at some point we had to, I guess, dial back really what we wanted to make and kind of then go, okay, we've got a time constraint here. Let's at least keep those Star Fox characters involved. And that's why they're in the mothership that's floating around. But it would have been awesome if we'd had the right amount of time or just made a different decision to make all of those guys actual playable characters. But, that would have meant pretty much scrapping everything we did on Dinosaur Planet. And And we're torn, right? Because we're like, hey, we really love Dinosaur Planet, so we don't want to just throw everything away. And there's a deadline coming, so you end up maybe making a compromise that isn't always the best compromise, but some decisions were made, and off you go.
So what was the idea behind those other characters that you wanted to add? Were they going to be like companions? Were they going to be playable characters? What was that idea?
I mean, look, like I said, we're just like I said,
Just playing
if you're
around, just
going to build a
testing.
real Star Fox adventure game, well, then you want all the Star Fox characters to
Sure.
be in that adventure game, right? And that's where you begin. But then, like I said, once you go, okay, well, then that means throwing out everything that we've already made. You just go, okay, we can't do that. Let's park it for another time. Turns out there wasn't another time, but that's okay.
So they were just merely just tests.
Exactly, tests of a creative direction that never played out. But that's what you have to do when you're trying to figure out what to do, right? You have to make things. You have to play around with stuff. You have to try ideas. And
Sure. I bet it was pretty cool playing around with those characters that have been around for, at that point, a decade.
Of course, I mean, anytime you get these same, like I said, if you imagine making a Donkey Kong game now, and the new one looks pretty damn awesome. But I'm sure that team had a lot of fun building that, right? So yeah, I mean, anytime you get to work with these iconic characters, I mean, we did the same with Mickey Mouse. Rib. In fact, I led the Mickey's Racing Adventure. Yeah, a little small Game Boy game, but we had some fun on that one because we got to build. In fact, it was the first time anyone had created a 3D Mickey, because we built a 3D render of it to help us with a lot of stuff, and we had to do a lot of work with Disney. So again, playing with iconic characters is always a lot of fun, but you can't let that dictate ultimately what you're trying to achieve creatively with your vision, right? That's just part of what comes.
Are you kidding me? You're telling me that the team at Rare was responsible for the first 3D model of Mickey Mouse? How cool is that? If it wasn't obvious already, you can really feel the excitement the Rare team had working on Star Fox. As if their ambition wasn't already sky high with Dinosaur Planet, they were eager to go all in and make this new entry feel like a true Star Fox adventure. But, as Lee mentioned, time was tight, and with Dinosaur Planet providing such a strong foundation already, many of their bigger Star Fox ideas had to stay behind. Literally, on the ship. Characters like Slippy and Peppy ended up taking more of a background role in the final version, but there was still one character who made it into the game. A character who, unlike Saber, wasn't replaced or cut. So, besides all the Star Fox elements that you want to add into a game, there was one element that you guys brought over that kind of has now been cemented in the Star Fox world, and that was Crystal.
Right.
You guys created
Right.
Crystal and Dinosaur Planet. I think that's kind of the most interesting difference between those two games is that not only is Crystal still in Star Fox Adventures, but she was actually one of the two main characters in the original vision for Dinosaur Planet. So what kind of happened that made Crystal kind of take a back seat in the product that we have today?
Again, it comes back to that constraint of a deadline and making it more Star Fox. So, the original Dinosaur Planet was very much an attempt to have these kind of two universes that you jump between. So the role of you remember the Warpstone character in Star Fox?
Remember this guy? Told you he'd come back.
His role in Dinosaur Planet was different. It's to enable you to just switch between the worlds, right?
The swap stone.
Yes, exactly. And so then when we are, hey, now you need to make this more of a Star Fox game, then that idea of switching between the two worlds had to get dialed back somewhat because we need to make Foxcloud the main character in this game. So therefore, but we loved the introduction, that fly in with Crystal and going to the Krazoa Palace and everything else. That was already there it's in in that original Dinosaur Planet setup, and we didn't want to throw that away. But then we're like, okay, well, how do what do we do with Crystal? So then we had to decide to, encase her in in that gem thing, and make it more about Fox. So so again, you can see us having to break and evolve some of those elements around, but it's all ultimately about serving that need now for it to be a Star Fox game and a deadline.
Were you guys kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say disappointed, but you guys had created Crystal, she was your guys' baby, and the fact that she just didn't have the role that she inevitably had in Star Fox Adventures, was there any, kind of disappointment with that?
Of course there is. I mean, with any creative change, and especially with again a creative team, changes don't always come easy. Changes have to be fought sometimes. They have to be argued, and then eventually you have to accept them, and then you kind of move on, right? But yeah, that's just normal with any of these changes. But at the end of the day, like I said, we had committed to make a Star Fox game, and then therefore we'll have to make some sacrifices to achieve that.
It's sad to see Crystal never truly receiving her rightfully deserved spot in the spotlight. It's even more unfortunate that I forgot to ask the question that's burning on all of our lips, that being, who was behind this redesign? Was there any other noticeable differences between jumping from Dinosaur Planet to Star Fox Adventures that really shaked up the way that the game came out to be?
Yeah, I think it's the main thing really is that those introduction of the it's the planet that's breaking up now, and Fox has got to go in and solve and bring those worlds back, bring that element back together. That was a big fundamental change than what Dinosaur Planet was about. Like I said, the Crystal element and her effectively just being sidelined somewhat. We were passionate about Tricky and that idea of a sidekick, and again, I think in hindsight that could have been utilized way more than it was. He was more of a fun addition, but I always think if I was remaking that game, or at least remaking the idea of a character and a sidekick, that sidekick really should be doing way more things than he ended.
He's always so damn hungry,
right? Yeah, I know, exactly right. But again, you're putting these things in. Your ambition ends up being bigger than what you can actually deliver. But we wanted to keep him in, or I definitely wanted to keep him in, I should say.
Is there anything you guys wished you could have done, besides, adding doing more with Tricky? Is there anything else that you can think of that you guys wanted to do more with?
I think we underplayed the Starwing sections. I mean, they were fun, but they were short, and they looked pretty cool, and they felt really nice to fly, but it was like you're over, and it was like, oh, what was the point of that? And the point was just to get some Star Fox in, but really we should have done a lot more with that. And like I said, a recreation of Star Fox Adventures is really taking those iconic characters, forgetting everything that we did on Dinosaur Planet, and rebuilding an adventure game with all of those guys. That would be pretty damn cool. But maybe someone gets to make that in the future. Let's see.
It released with pretty good reception, Star Fox Adventures. It released with a lot of 8s and 9s, and currently it's sitting at an 82 on Metacritic. So I'd say you made a pretty damn good game.
No, it's pretty good. Especially with the amount of compromises and changing of direction that we had to do. It's we were happy with the outcome, and like I said, from a visual aspect in particular, I think it's by far probably the best looking GameCube game, full stop, and still holds up now. There was some fur rendering technique that we were doing. Yeah, how long ago was it now? Yeah, 25 years ago. That still looks awesome, I think. So yeah.
So at the end of the day, the dramatic transformation from one game to the other was less dramatic and more of a powerful merging of two great ideas forged by two incredibly passionate and talented teams. Maybe I was expecting something more like The Social Network, shouting execs, walkouts, and bitter disputes. But instead, what we got was something much more inspiring. a collaboration filled with creativity, understanding, and pure enthusiasm for making the best game possible. I'm honestly excited by the fact that instead of feeling defeated or forced to compromise their ambitions, the team was passionate and motivated to make the most of this new direction, all while staying true to their original vision. I wouldn't have been surprised if Lee had told me that Nintendo came in and turned everything upside down, disregarding their ideas and gutting the spirit of Dinosaur Planet. But instead, we're left with a beautiful story, a testament to the power of collaboration and the magic that can happen when passionate people come together. Whether you're a fan of the final product or not, there's something undeniably inspiring about that. For me, Star Fox Adventures is just one of those games that just feels like it's locked away in some special part of my brain that randomly gets unlocked about once a year for some unexplained reason. It just comes and goes as I think about the time I had playing when I was just a wee little boy. It was one of those rare games that we actually owned, and while I played it over and over again, I never got far, but it always stuck with me. I think much like myself, many other young gamers of that time didn't have or even know of the baggage of Dinosaur Planet, and without it, it allowed the game to appear as its own original experience in its own right. And if you were really young like me at the time, you didn't even have the extra baggage of Star Fox stepping away from its traditional on-rail roots. Dinosaur Planet showed so much promise. Without Nintendo really stepping in and making it their own thing, who's to say what this game could have become? Maybe it could have been great. Maybe in some alternate universe, Rare would have had full ownership over the brand and we'd be getting Dinosaur Planet 5, Scale's Revenge out later this year. I'd like to believe that in that universe, Star Fox also sees frequent releases and the two franchises living in harmony together. But in this one, we got Star Fox Adventures, and I wouldn't want to have it any other way. Hey everyone, if you made it this far, thank you. This is definitely the longest video and the longest it took me to put together, so thank you for making it this far. And while you're here, make sure to like and subscribe. That way I know to keep doing more of these essays and fun interviews with leaders in this industry. I of course want to give a huge shout out to Lee. This was an incredible opportunity, and no matter how this video actually turns out, I'm still incredibly grateful for the time he made for just some dumb fan of his work. So thank you again, Lee. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I didn't waste your time. Also, if you guys liked this video and really love Star Fox Adventures or even game development stories, I guess, and want to see more from our hour-long conversation, let me know in the comments. There's some really cool stuff that I didn't add in this video for the sake of time that I think is really interesting, including Lee's inspiration for the game. So I might just post a raw, unedited video of that whole interview. I don't know. Just leave a comment if you want to see that. Some really cool stuff. And make sure to follow me on just everything. Twitter, Blue Sky, Twitch, just started streaming, so definitely head over there. That would mean a lot. Spotify for our podcast, Press Reset. Just about everywhere at Poogles Games. I'll link everything in the description below. And don't forget to like and subscribe here, please. I worked really hard on this. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.